Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're joining this session, the CEU. Welcome. Thank you for being here today. My name is Oscar Orozco Aguilar. And before anything, I need to start off with a disclosure, which is that before I sent out the title or before I was able to see the title of this presentation, I actually missed something, which you might see on the title, which is the ethics of spirituality and religion in grief. I think when we first sent it out, it just said the ethics of spirituality in grief, and it should have added and religion. And we'll get to that as well. So again, welcome. We will be discussing ethics of spirituality and religion in grief. And I hope that you all will take something meaningful from this presentation. So let's get started. So first we'll look at some objectives. So for today, I'm hoping that you all will be able to explain the relationship between clients' spiritual and religious beliefs and their psychosocial functioning. Discuss the influence of the counselor's belief or the therapist's beliefs, attitude, and values on clients and the counseling process. Discuss importance of considering clients' spiritual and religious perspectives during the initial sessions or initial assessment. Describe and apply various models of spiritual and religious development. Describe the spiritual religious aspect of grief. And finally, describe cultural differences in response to grief. If at any point any of this feels heavy or that you need to take a pause, please do so. Pause the video, come back to it when you feel you can. Okay. So to begin, why was it important to distinguish spirituality from religion? And that is because they are different. So spirituality derives from the Latin root spiritus, which means breath of life. Right. In the summit, when they first, I believe it was in the 1950s, when everyone kind of came together to the spirituality and religious summit to try and figure out what is spirituality? How does someone define that? And there was a lot of discussion and disagreement about how to define spirituality. But this is kind of what those groups in that summit decided, which was spirituality is the drawing out and infusion of spirit in one's life. It is experienced as an active and passive process. It includes one's capacity for growth, creativity, and development of a value system, right? You can also see it as a personal connection with the universe. How is that different than from religion, right? Religion derived from the Latin root word religio, which means a bond between humanity and greater than human power. Religion is often an organized community of faith that has written doctrines or codes, and it often regulates the behavior for those participants who are in that organized community of faith, right? So they are both used interchangeably. However, they are two separate concepts. And that's very important for us as clinicians to be able to understand, because it gives us the understanding that there will be people either who present as spiritual, people who present as religious, and sometimes someone in the middle. So that's what we continue, which is spirituality and religion fall on a continuum, right? Your experience with spirituality or religion is not going to be the same as others. So while many people do not distinguish between the two and often again are used interchangeably, it is important for us as clinicians to be able to recognize where the client falls on this continuum to ensure that we are addressing those concerns that they're coming into us with, right? Some example is some client may come in to see us and present as religious, but not spiritual. So these individuals, not all, but some, go through the motions of those doctrines, of those codes, in order because they feel that sense of duty or obligation. as well as also a sense of fear of consequences if they do not practice or do those things that are written in their codes, in their Bibles or holy text. Other people may present as spiritual, but not religious. So these individuals are not affiliated with a particular group or religion oftentimes, but still feel connected to something greater than themselves. These could be individuals who before were part of a religious group and now are deciding that maybe that group is no longer fitting them. It's not something that they want to continue to follow, and therefore may kind of branch out into more of that spiritual realm and trying to discover what it is that connects them to that greater power, greater sense of self. And so for us as clinicians, again, it's very important to be able to help the client tell us where it is that they fall on that continuum. If it is something that they mention is important to them, if their spirituality or religion is important, it is important then for us to be able to help them put into words, where is it that they land on this? Is there a particular organized religion that is important? Is it less about a religion than it is a connection with something greater than yourself? Where does that meaning lie for them? So that's very important for us to be able to consider and think about, again, as we're building that rapport with clients. So beginning to look at the aspects of spirituality and religion. So like any intervention, spirituality and religion have beneficial as well as adverse effects on different individuals. So one study done by Jones and colleagues in 2015 stated that one's spiritual or religious beliefs have a significant impact on both the physical and mental health outcomes of clients. So people can hold both positive or negative spiritual beliefs. Depending on these beliefs will depend on the impact they have on health outcomes. So what are some examples of these negative spiritual beliefs? Some can look like one should rely on faith alone for healing, right? Turning to medicine shows lack of faith. I know many of my clients who I sometimes have worked with came with that belief that they did not want to take medication, that they did not want to go see a doctor to help with some of their mental health struggles because they believe that that would be going against their faith. It would show a lack of faith in God or a higher power. And so oftentimes they are not comfortable with that and actually hurts their health outcomes because we know that that medication would sometimes help tremendously for some of their symptoms. Other times, another negative spiritual belief could be that crises are punishments of God and that God is not supportive. So as you can imagine, if those are beliefs that I have anytime something happens and I feel as though it is a punishment, that reaction is going to be much different than if I were to see that as something supportive or positive, or to be able to look at what am I learning from this and not take this as a punishment. All of these are going to be very important for us as clinicians to be able to, again, not judge or make the person feel bad or feel judged because they have this belief, but simply trying to understand how does this belief shape the way that you live your life, the ways that you believe, things like that, in order for us to have a good concept of which direction is going to be the most helpful for that client. Again, our role is not to say this is a good belief, this is a bad belief, you need to let this go. That is not our role, right? But it's simply to help our clients see whether this belief helping them live the life that they want to, or if it's causing some, again, negative impacts on them in their lives. Another thing is that it can create toxic environments, lowering immune system functioning, and increases both stress hormones and blood pressure. And so we know that there are physical side effects and adverse effects if we hold some of these negative spiritual beliefs. It can diminish hope and optimism so that it can increase some mental health problems such as anxiety and depression. And that was a study that was just done this year. And it's estimated that about 10% of the population has negative spiritual beliefs. Oftentimes, if you're familiar with CBT, right, you understand or probably have heard of core beliefs. Similarly, these core beliefs could interact and be parallel to their religious and spiritual beliefs. And so being able to help them see and understand what they believe, and if that's something they want to continue to want to believe in their life, or if it's something that they want to be able to work past, believe something else, whatever it is, right? Having them tell us what they think is going to be the best course of action, and that's going to lead them to live a life that, again, they want to live. So there is demand and ethical support for the integration of spirituality and religion into counseling, right? When faced with distress, many people already turn to existing religious sources: prayer, faith, priest, a clergy, a pastor, whatever it is that that person, depending on their faith, believes. They turn to those to be able to cope. We already know that a percentage of the population already turn to spirituality and religion for coping mechanisms, for comfort, for safety. So it's important for us to be able to keep that in mind when working with clients who present with spiritual or religious either concerns or present tools or coping skills from their spirituality or religion that helps them during difficult times. We need to be able to identify those and work with clients to be able to ensure that they're practicing those coping skills. According to the Pew Research Center survey, 90% of Americans believe in some kind of higher power. Again, whether they call God, God, or they call it a different name, whether they believe in a higher power or connected to nature, whatever that is, 90% of Americans believe in some kind of higher power. Around 56%, again, believe in God as described in the Christian Bible. 11% said that they believe in another type of higher power or spiritual force. And 11% said that they did not believe in God or a higher power of any kind. Both the APA and the ACA have formally acknowledged that religion in their ethical guidelines as an issue for counselors and therapists to consider in their practice. And the APA has even gone so far as to approve a division called the 36 Society for the Psychology of Religion and Spirituality, as well as the Joint Commission mandates a spiritual assessment for patients as well, because, again, they understand that religion and spirituality have an impact in the way people live, the way people cope, and move through their life. As those beliefs change, evolve, they lose some of those beliefs, they gain new ones. It is always changing and ebb and flow. And because of that, we need to be paying attention to how spirituality or religion, it plays a role in our clients' lives. And again, it is vast, it is a continuum, as I mentioned. And so there is going to be a lot, or it's going to be a high need for us to take time, if we're comfortable, to explore that with the client and ensure, again, that those beliefs or practices are being included in the therapy services, if that's going to be helpful for that client. Okay. So again, this is just a very kind of short glimpse about the difference between spirituality and religion. But again, I hope that you are able to see and understand that as time progresses, there is more and more research that's coming out to say this is an important aspect that us as therapists and counselors need to be able to understand. Even if we're not comfortable, still be able to notice and then refer out if that is something the client is coming to us with. Okay. So with that in mind, as a presentation is about, how is it that then spirituality and religion play in hand with grief? As we know, with grief, oftentimes many people, not all, but some, will have periods of loss of faith, questioning of faith, worldviews, all, etc. And so being able to help guide our clients through their grief by incorporating spirituality or religion components based on the client's needs and our comfortability with guiding them through some of those practices, conversations surrounding their grief as well. So to get started, discussing a little bit about first, what is loss and grief? Many of you probably already have a good understanding of this, right? Which is one, we know that loss and grief don't just happen after the death of a person. Many times that is a big reason for grief, but it's not always the reason. And that's, again, something important to recognize in our assessments. If someone's coming in with loss or grief symptoms or components, that we don't forget that it's not just did someone die in this person's life, but what have they lost that was important to them. Anticipatory and disenfranchised grief, right? As we know, people with anticipatory could be someone who has a family member or loved one with a terminal illness. And they may still be alive, but that anticipation of that death is still there, and that grief is valid. Disenfranchised grief is grief that is not usually accepted or recognized by society, right? And so that could be a plethora of things: a pet loss, loss of a job, moving homes, an ex-husband or a spouse that passes away, and maybe other people don't understand why you're sad because you divorced and that was in your past, but that grief is still for you, right? And so children sometimes are just a category of disenfranchised grief in itself, because many adults believe that children are too young to grieve, that they don't feel these things, and we know that that's not true. So, as I mentioned earlier, depending on the circumstance of the loss, it can lead to questioning of faith. And I have seen this many times in my work as someone who specializes in loss and grief and death, with many people coming in to say, I don't know what I believe anymore. Right? So worldview can be altered. And worldview refers to one's total outlook on life. So, and the client's worldview is shaped by many, many factors, including their culture, their religion and or spirituality, race, ethnicity, sexuality, gender expression, family, socio-political factors that shape the way that we think, we feel, and we behave, right? It ties in almost with the concept of our assumptive world as well, which our assumptive world concept refers to the assumptions or beliefs that ground, secure, stabilize, and orient people, right? They are our core beliefs. And in the face of death and trauma, oftentimes those beliefs are shattered, or changed or threatened to be lost. And that disorientation and sometimes even panic can enter the lives of those people who are affected. As one can imagine, right? We have a belief of what we think the world is like, what the world should be. And then we lose something that is unfathomable to us, that we did not expect, that was sudden, traumatic, or maybe not traumatic. Even if you expect it, the reality of that loss threatens to shatter our beliefs of what we think life should happen like, what we thought God was supposed to be like, what we thought that higher power was supposed to be like. I hear all the time, why, if God was real, why are all these awful things happening? Why did my mom die when there's so many more awful people in the world? Why did she have to die young, right? There's anger, there's frustration, confusion, and suddenly the way that we view the world and the ground that we thought we were standing on suddenly is crumbling underneath of us, underneath of the clients that we serve. That could be a huge crisis, and thus can alter what that person believes in terms of their faith, religion, or spirituality. And then, of course, we also have secondary losses, right? That losses that oftentimes many other people who haven't experienced that loss fail to recognize. So those are routine, sense of safety, a sense of comfort, the love that we had with that thing or person that we've lost, the hope for the world, right? Spirit. Sometimes people say, my spirit is different. I don't know who I am, a sense of self. Secondary losses tend to be much more personal. And so many people don't often talk about them. They don't express them for fear that other people won't understand. Right? So as humans, we oftentimes don't do well with loss. And what used to be a source of comfort, safety for many people, refuge in times of distress and trauma, now suddenly becomes a place they don't want to touch, they don't want to go to. And as you can imagine, that can cause a lot of issues and problems within their mental health as well. So, to talk a little bit as well as the culture around loss and grief, specifically the American culture. And something that I wanted to put an asterisk on and really specify is when I talk about the American culture, this primarily represents the white experience. You know, white Americans tend to go through this type of response to grief a lot more than other type of minorities, because other minorities tend to have culture that is different around death and loss. And we'll go into that too. But when we think about here in America, which we don't do very well when talking about grief and supporting those who are grieving, the first one is the difficulties with recognizing, validating, naming, and giving space to grief. It makes us uncomfortable. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to point it out. We don't want to think that that's what's happening, because that would then would require us to do something about it, to support that person, to give them that space. And many people are not comfortable doing that because they feel uncomfortable, right? There is almost as well as a societal timeline on grief. And I hear this all the time from my clients as well who are grieving, who say, it's been 3 months, it's been 5 months, it's been 6 months. Why am I still feeling this way? Everyone's looking for that year, because apparently after the first year, everything is just magically easier. And many people are very disappointed when the year anniversary comes, and sometimes they feel worse, or sometimes that grief is heavier than it was before. And again, it goes back to that questioning of faith and religion or spirituality, because again, what I thought I believed is different. I'm experiencing something different with this grief than I thought I would be because I have faith, or I had faith. Then why am I still feeling this way? So many people think faith, religion, spirituality erases grief, and that is not true. That is not the case. So cultural norms around expression of grief as well, right? Grievers, after the first couple of weeks, are made to feel that they have to privatize their grief, right? Because in the first couple of days, couple of weeks following the loss or death of someone, you have typically that community support readily available. Everyone wants to help. What can I do? What can I offer you? How can I support you through this awful time? And typically, in those first couple of weeks, sometimes people don't need that much immediate support. Sometimes they do want to be alone. Sometimes they want to just sit in their grief. They want to be able to figure out what has changed, what all they've lost, and what does that mean for them now. And when they really do need that support, when they really do need those people, a month or two later, when they're finally coming to grips with everything, that's when everyone else is not there anymore, right? Because they've moved on with their life. Their loss, that was not their loss. Their persons, maybe they did not lose. And so their life, for the most part, is still going around the same. They still have the same worldview. They have the same assumptive world. While that person who is grieving is still trying to put all the pieces together in a way that is different than what it was before. And so then that person who's grieving is made to feel, well, now I can't say anything. Now I can't bring this up anymore because I'm going to make someone else uncomfortable by talking about my grief. And that is very difficult for those people, as you can imagine. And then therefore, silence of the deceased happens. No one speaks their name. It is almost as though, again, that person is only made to believe that they existed in their world because other people are acting like they did not exist in their world too. Everyone always says, I don't want to say the wrong thing and make them feel worse. I don't want to make them feel sad. I don't want to make them think about that. And what I often tell family or friends of people who are grieving, who are trying to be more supportive, I often say that they are already sad. They are already thinking about them. You bringing it up is not going to cause them to suddenly remember. They've already remembered. You are giving them that space to talk about the person or the thing they've lost and make it real. And so again, and during this time, this is where people are trying to figure out what happened to that community of faith. What happened to those people who said that they were always going to be there? What happened to that figure of higher power who were supposed to comfort me, who was supposed to not let me go through really difficult or awful things? Why are my friends, family pulling away from me as though I'm walking around with some disease? Why do people look at me and then look away or look down? Because suddenly I'm the person who lost and is mourning and grieving. It's a horrible response. And again, it's why some people really struggle with that faith, because what they thought they would be receiving during this time, oftentimes they are not. So again, this is more about the American culture, primarily with the white Americans, but there are different expressions to grief, to loss, right? And we have to be able to be aware of that too. So if we look at different cultural reactions to loss and grief, we can see that different people do it different ways. If we look at African cultures, they center on becoming ancestors and the way, really focusing on the way someone passes away. It is not common in African cultures to discuss end-of-life wishes because they believe that death is not the end. So to talk about what they want during their end of life is a bit taboo, and they rely heavily on family members to make those decisions. Why is that important for us as clinicians, right? If someone comes in and they say, I come from an African culture who practices those traditions, those rituals still, we may not feel comfortable because we may say, well, why isn't the person who is dying here to make some of these choices? It may feel unethical, it might feel not correct to us, but to them and to their culture, that is what feels right. That is what's going to help them die well in their practice. Important for us to recognize that as well, so we aren't projecting our beliefs onto those individuals. Right? In practice, they remove the body, feet first, and take it to the burial site in a confusing manner as to where that spirit won't be able to return back home and remain in that realm, but is actually able to cross over, right? So burials may happen right away, or they can be delayed. It just depends on the tribe and their practices. If we look at Asian cultures, they tend to be more collectivist, so therefore it impacts the rituals around death and dying. So if we look at specifically Japanese death rituals, they oftentimes combine their faith and spirituality and beliefs in Shinto and Buddhist traditions. So they are active in washing the body, right? Preparing favorite foods of the person who passed as offerings, as well as cleansing the burial site. So there are rituals, right? Traditions that are very important as part of that mourning, as part of the grieving, that help people move through the loss, move through the grief. Right? As through COVID, many of those rituals and traditions, many people were not able to practice, and why so much of that loss was traumatic and complicated. And so it's important that as we are working with clients and as we are discussing what it is that from their spirituality, from their religion, from their faith, what rituals mean something to you, to that person, what rituals or traditions are going to help you express this grief so you're not holding on to that. Indian burial rituals or death rituals, often influenced by Hinduism, they believe in the continuation of the life cycle of life, death and reincarnation, right? And it continues in their belief until the soul transcends, or what they call the samsara. And so again, that belief, which is sometimes very different than beliefs held by therapists, by counselors, but is important, again, to be able to recognize and incorporate in session, because to them, those are going to be the things that help carry them forward, that help heal their grief, as well as potentially tie back in to some of those traditions of their spirit, their religion or spirituality that maybe they have left or not practiced because that initial grief was too heavy and they had to take a step back, right? Other cultural reactions sometimes are celebrations of the passing of that person. We think of Dia de los Muertos, which in the Latin community and culture is a day of the year where we remember, talk about, and celebrate the dead. It is normalized to cry, to express emotion, to be angry, to be whatever it is, to be happy and share laughs and memories about the person. But it normalizes grief and death to talk about it, right? There in South Africa, they have the after tears party. So after the funeral, when they're all together, after the tears have passed, they then have tea and they have a party. In New Orleans, they have the jazz funeral, which many of you have seen or heard of, where there is a big parade of people playing jazz and different music and a big celebration as they take the body to the cemetery, right? And so we have to also recognize that not everyone's perception of grief and loss is going to be what we think it is, which is sadness and anger and confusion. Sometimes those individuals may have really good closure with the loss, but simply just need help with remembering or being reminded of what practices or what things they can do to help them heal through or navigate through that grief. So many cultures incorporate religious or spiritual beliefs in their grief, in their funeral services or rituals. Many of them are included into that. So that's why the grieving process will vary depending on each culture. So this again really brings back the need and stresses the importance of why that spiritual assessment is key in those first few sessions in order to really have a good understanding of what our clients are going through, what helps them, what used to help them, what no longer helps them, what no longer holds meaning for them, what does hold meaning, what would you like for that to look like, or what would you like for something to look like to be in its place for the things that you've lost. And so it's very confusing. It's very, again, world changing when we lose something and the ground beneath us disappears or feels like it does. And so our goal is to be able to, again, help these clients be able to, for themselves, identify what they think is going to be the most helpful to navigate through this grief. Is it connecting to the religion or spirituality that they used to practice, but they stopped practicing? Is it that I have to go and look for a different church or a different religion or a different group of people Do I want to incorporate these beliefs but leave these beliefs behind because those don't serve my purpose anymore? It's holding that space for them to figure out again their world that was just shattered after that loss. So as we talk about this, right, we need to also discuss the influence of our own beliefs. We have the potential to intentionally or unintentionally influence a client towards his, her, or their own worldview. And that's not our goal, right? We do not need to come in and share what our beliefs are and what we think the client needs to do in order to find that balance again, right? Our role, therapists with clarity of our values and beliefs, are less likely to lead their clients towards adopting their values and beliefs, right? So if I know what I believe and I know what I don't believe, there's a better chance of me knowing how not to project that onto my client. Our task as therapists and counselors is to provide a non-judgmental and accepting environment for clients to discuss their religion or spiritual concerns. Only the client is responsible for determining which values to maintain, discard, replace, or modify. This is why some therapists and counselors are not comfortable with working with people who come in with spiritual or religious concerns, because they are still trying to figure out their own beliefs. Do I believe in God? Do I believe in a higher power? What do I think about people who have a different belief and don't call God God, who have believe in multiple deities, perhaps, right? And so we have to be very aware about our beliefs, if we are comfortable with them, if we're secure about our beliefs, or if we're somewhere in the middle where we're not too sure, right? And that's important, because that self-awareness allows us to recognize limits. One of the first limits, right, is the acknowledgement of any reluctancy with discussing religion or spirituality. Again, this could be due to the therapist's own spiritual concerns or religious concerns, due to negative past experiences. Maybe that person, that therapist, has their own religious trauma that they are still having to work with, and they maybe not feel comfortable working with people going through similar situations, or maybe not feel comfortable because of that countertransference, right? Another limit to recognize is assessment of client's spectrum of spiritual concerns. We need to be able to see and help them understand whether the presenting issue could be related to their current spiritual beliefs and practices, which can sound like, how can God allow these things to happen? Why is this happening if I believe in God? And I thought this was supposed to be this, and that, right? Or could it be influenced by the client's spiritual beliefs or practices? Instead of being related to, they're being influenced by. So that could look something like, should I be having sex with my partner before marriage? And so that's my religion, and my spiritual beliefs are influencing some of my decisions. Avoidance of crossing professional boundaries and adopting the role of a religious leader. We do not want to be, right, our role is not a religious leader unless that is something you practice as well, or you have a degree and that is a title that you're comfortable with and have the ethical standards to practice that as well. If you are not, like many of therapists practicing, doing so would interfere with the therapeutic process. Therapists who are self-aware know when to refer a client to a spiritual and or religious community resource if it's something that's not appropriate to discuss in session, right? So that's something to say if someone comes in and says, I'm struggling with the readings that are in my Bible. I'm struggling to believe this and this about my faith, and it's causing me to do this, or the other. That may be something that they need to discuss with a pastor, a priest, a clergy, someone from their faith who can help them, guide them through those kinds of decisions that are not ours to make for them. And so it is very important because as we this whole presentation has talked about, the growing need to involve spirituality and religious beliefs of each client, specifically as well, again, in their grief, because many people already turn to religion and spirituality for coping skills, for safety, for comfort during grief, as well, or on the other spectrum, they completely lose or don't know what to believe from their past faith or religion, or spirituality practices. Therefore, to be able to guide them through that, for them to make their own decisions, not us, is so important in that healing. Because those tools, those things that they would get from that community of faith, those spiritual or religious practices, could be the very thing that helps them navigate that grief journey instead of being stuck wherever it is that they are in their grief journey. Okay. So, with all of this being said, right, there are spiritual and religious development models that I think are important to look at for those of us who do feel comfortable working with people who present with spiritual or religious concerns, that these models could be potentially something that could help guide some of those conversations, or just the way that we're thinking about how we want to practice or do therapy with those individuals as we get to know them more. So this is part of the presentation where there is a lot of words, a lot of reading, and I apologize. I did my very best to try and include as minimal as I could, but these models are very heavy with information, so please definitely look more into them themselves. There's a lot of really good information, but hopefully I still encapsulate a good chunk of each of these models. So the first model is the Gordon Alporn as model, excuse me. So the first model of faith that he created was in the 1950s and focused on religious sentiments, which he coined to mean religious beliefs, oftentimes empowered by effective energies, that lead to consistent religious and secular behavior. And he believed that these sentiments or beliefs occurred in three stages. First being the raw credulity. So this is during childhood. They tend to believe whatever the parents or the adults in their lives are telling them about religion or spirituality. It fulfills this need of belonging and acceptance. If I am part of this group, then therefore I belong. The second stage, satisfying rationalism, usually begins during adolescence. This is where individuals start to question what they have been taught about religion or spirituality. They seek identity that is separate from their parents or family. And those individuals may end up coming back and staying very in the place that they were to begin with. They may find or explore different religions or different spiritual practices and realize that, no, I think where I'm at feels right for me. So they can explore, but may end up very much coming back and staying in that belief system. And then the third stage is being religious maturity. So movement between uncertainty and faith. This occurs when individuals remain connected to a religious or spiritual tradition, but approach it critically. So there's discernment of which beliefs do I want to keep and which beliefs I might want to discard. And again, this process can be difficult for that person they feel like they're nitpicking their religion or they're nitpicking their beliefs. But sometimes that is what's important, for them to discard what they don't connect with from their religion or spiritual practices and what they do connect with. And again, sometimes it causes people who are religious to be more spiritual, or people who are more spiritual to find a religion that really grounds them, whatever that may be. The second model is Jania's 5-stage faith development model. So this model is origin in psychoanalytic theory. And according to this theory, the progression of faith development is not always linear, nor does it run smoothly. So as we look through these stages, right, the first being egocentric faith, which is one's religion being rooted in fear and a need for comfort. So this, again, survivors of abuse or neglect having difficulty trusting relationships, prayers used as a mean of manipulation and asking God for favors. So it isn't a big on faith and connection for a purpose or for comfort, really, or it is for need of comfort, excuse me, but it more rooted in that anxiety, that fear that if I don't do this, or if I don't ask God for this or that higher power, then that means I'm not going to get it, or I'm not going to get what I want. And so it comes from that. The second stage being dogmatic faith. So this is a stage where people are continuously trying to earn the approval of God. So they adhere to religious or spiritual laws out of fear of disappointing God or that higher power and not being rewarded for eternal blessing, so the afterlife. Transitional faith being the third stage, that's when people begin to critically examine their faith. They may experiment with several spiritual paths, may feel alone and disconnected during this time because they don't have a group of people or community of faith that understand the path that they're taking. And so individuals may switch religion or spiritual practices at this stage. So this is where someone makes the decision to try new practices, join new religious communities to see where they lie, where they fit in that. The fourth stage is the reconstructed faith. So this is the individuals who have matured and have chosen a faith that provides meaning and purpose to them. They are driven by their own morals and ideas and perceive God as a friend and a source of sustenance, right? And lastly is the transcendent faith, which, according to Jania, most individuals do not reach this stage. These are individuals who are usually much more spiritually mature and committed to more universal ideas, a sense of connection with others of diverse faiths, have a relationship with the divine, and apply spiritual principles to their lives. This is, I think, speaks to some of those individuals who are part of a spiritual or religious community and do not open their mind or are very closed off to listening to anything other than their own beliefs. This stage, Jania says, are the individuals who have their beliefs, but however, can have relationships and practice and be open to different spiritual principles that others may bring to them as well. And thirdly, we have Washburn's theory of psychospiritual development. So this model is based on psychoanalytical theory and transpersonal psychology. So according to Washburn, the aim of human development is spiritual fulfillment. This is a result from the interplay, he said, of the ego, which he described as the personal aspect, and the dynamic ground, which he said was the spiritual aspect. And this is a lifelong process. So the ego can function receptively, right? So it moves closer to the ground, or actively, which it moves away from the ground, away from the spiritual realms, the spiritual aspects. And it continues throughout the development process as both, and evolves through three different stages. And so first stage happens from birth until late in childhood. So at that point, the ego is fully immersed in the dynamic ground. The belief is that at birth, we are still connected with all the spiritual aspects. We are one. Nothing of the physical world has tainted or affected us yet. But after birth, the ego starts to become more active. So repression of the dynamic ground. And at latency, ego is completely separated from ground, according to this model. In the second phase, the ego functions primarily in the active mode and becomes more autonomous as the ground recedes into the unconsciousness. They may remain in this stage for the entire life. Most people do stay in this stage. Around midlife, highly evolved egos, according to this model, can relax that repression, can reconnect with the ground for purpose of transcendence. So those individuals who do reach that third phase, is that reconnection with ground leads to emotional and functional difficulties. And that is to be expected because it can bring spiritual awakening to that individual. When they begin to realize that, what my parents taught me, I don't know if I believe anymore. I used to think this, but now I'm not sure if I do. And that can bring a lot of emotional and functional turmoil, but it is what's needed in order to get that person to get to that place where they need to be to again live a life that they feel fulfilled for. Okay. There are two other honorable mentions that I will not going to go super in depth to, just again because there's so much information, but I wanted to make sure you guys were aware of them as well. One of those is Fowler stages of faith. Again, that's grounded in cognitive development theory. It's 7 stages, starting with primal faith, and it goes all the way through universalizing faith. So if you're interested in that, definitely look for Fowler stages of faith. And the second one was Oser's religious judgment model. So this one is based on cognitive approaches to spiritual development, and it has 5 stages. So a lot of stages in these models. And this model says that crises or crisis situations provoke individuals to explore their relationship with God or the ultimate, whatever that person chooses to call that higher power. And it is a continuous process in transformation of faith as long as people age due to experience, right? So as we get older, with that experience, with that wisdom, it may change and affect the way that we believe, the way that we practice our beliefs, all of those things. Obviously, a limitation to most of these models is that they are linear, or they show a stage process, right? You go through this stage, even though some of them do say it's not linear and it's always changing. It's something for us to remember, is that just because there are these stages doesn't mean people progress through them in that linear order. They can go through several of those stages throughout their lives. So that is something important to remember as we're working with clients. So what I thought was also important for each of you to take away from this is some practices to help those who remain in this physical world cope with that grief, as they're also struggling with their spirituality or religion, faith as well. So one of those things is storytelling and breath prayer. So storytelling is one of my favorite things to do with clients. Again, because telling our story of grief, our story of navigating the new world that we're living in without that person, can help carry that sorrow. And for many people, as I mentioned, if it's been over 2-3 months, they're probably not used to talking. They're not used to telling the story anymore because of society. So it can be very difficult, but there is healing power in telling our stories, to release that, to rehearse our story, right? Which I thought, and this was a really beautiful metaphor that I wanted to share with you to kind of help understand the power of storytelling. So the word hearse is a vehicle used to transport the dead to a cemetery or funeral. That word comes from the Latin root word hirpex. I may say that wrong. Hirpex, which is a harrow, which is a rake-like sharp tooth. For those gardeners out there, know exactly what that is. That gardeners use to go into the soil, break the ground up in order to plant whatever they need to plant, right? So by rehearsing our storytelling, we are taking that harrow, that rake, and we're hitting that soil that has been hardened in order to allow for new growth to also occur. And many people, that's going to take a while. It's not going to be easy. Some people's ground is a lot harder than other people. They've been through that journey maybe far longer. They have more layers to it. And so it's going to take a while before that tool can reach that soil. But we can reach it the more we learn to tell our story. So sometimes, again, a breath prayer as well. That's something that can look like adding again a prayer to breathing. That could look like something, as an example I gave here, where you ask the client to inhale and say a silent prayer, which can look like anything they want. An example here is inhaling, and silently we say, Creator of life and love, hold, and visualize those who you love. Maybe it's the person who has passed, and it's difficult to think of them and it hurts, but in that moment, we allow ourselves to feel and think of them. And then we exhale, and again, another silent prayer. Comfort me and strengthen me. Right? So again, inhaling with that silent prayer, hold with that visualization of those who we've lost or we love, and exhale with another silent prayer. This, again, can be a good practice for those who are questioning their faith, not sure if they still want to practice praying, or don't know if they believe in God at all again because of what they've gone through. Reminding clients that they don't have to call God, God, if that's not comfortable for them. It is whatever they feel comfortable. So again, as this prayer says, right, Creator of life, instead of using the word God, helping clients form the language that is most comfortable for them when it comes to their spirituality and religious practices. A second practice is called savoring the word. Right? So this involves reading excerpts from holy texts of the person's choosing, or from literally any literature, in a way that penetrates and changes both head and heart. So again, whether it's a religious text, a holy text, or if it's a poem or a literature or a book or whatever it is that they've seen, but something that speaks to them. We set aside 15, 20 minutes of uninterrupted alone time. We center down, again, whether that's with a breath prayer or with meditation. For this exercise, it can look like something like this, which we inhale with that silent prayer, wisdom from on high and within. Exhale, change me, my heart, my attitude. And saying that and practicing that as many times until the person feels comfortable to begin reading. Then you make the person read the passage or literature once silently to themselves, a second time out loud, then a third time noting a word or phrase that stood out to them. What feeling did it evoke? What memories come to the surface because of it? What images come to mind? Allowing the words to form a prayer or mantra or intention to carry with them today. And this is where they can include journaling for them to carry that with them and remember what that is, or whatever form of practicing they want to do with that, or that's something they just keep in their minds and can remember to hold on to. But looking at words and looking at different meanings in texts can help shape that experience we're having of grief and loss or questioning of faith, can really help turn or look at different perspectives and can be really helpful for many clients. The third is letter writing, another one of my favorites to do with clients. This is especially helpful for those with an unresolved conflict or with questions for their loved one. So with this exercise, as again, many people know, you find a pen and paper, create a comfortable space for yourself, and decide whether you want to write a letter to your loved one or from your loved one to you. Some people, as I work again to incorporate spirituality and religion, it may be a letter to God, a letter to a higher power, right? To express our anger, to express our grief, to express our sadness, things that we may not feel good doing because we were made to believe that being angry with God or being angry at a higher power was something wrong. But anger and grief is very real, is very important to recognize, and they need to be able to have that conversation with that higher power, whatever they choose to believe. And this could be a really good exercise to help them do that. So again, you center your thoughts with either a breath prayer or meditation. Inhale, something can sound like grace and peace within me. Exhale, grace and peace around me. And if it's from you to your loved one, some prompts could say something like, this morning, I wanted to tell you, since your death, I've been surprised by. I did, saw, or said something that reminded me of you today. If it's a letter from your loved one to you, that could look something like, I have a new perspective. And most of all, I want you to, or it could say, have you heard me tell you lately? And allow the person to write. This is heavy. Many people experiencing grief very early on, or for people who have masked their grief and are beginning to now emerge and come to terms with that grief, or trying to find a relationship with their grief. This is heavy. And I tell my clients, if you need to cry and get all the tears on the paper, that's okay. If you need to stop writing and go take a walk or take some breaths and calm yourself down, that's okay. If you need to stop writing today and come back to this another day, that's also okay. Right? So with these practices, they are heavy when it comes to grief, but being able to create that space that is safe and comfortable to help clients through these practices. And finally, if none of this works and you don't know where else to start, my go-to tool that I always use is the 3 C's, which is choose, connect, and communicate. So let's choose what is best for you, what you want to attend, what you want to join, what you want to do, and what you cannot. Right? Can you go to church? Can you go and face your community of faith, this community that wants to support you, but now you're questioning your faith and you don't know if you want that kind of support? Maybe you are being invited to these prayers, to rosaries, to find people and who are coming together to heal, but you don't want to be in that group right now for whatever reason, right? So it's helping just people choose and remember that they have autonomy, they have power, which sometimes people can forget in the face of grief and loss. Connect. Grief intensifies feelings of loneliness, as I've mentioned before. It leads to isolation. It's difficult, but important to not remove ourselves from other people's lives. And so again, if you're not connecting anymore with the people who you used to, or who often brought you that solace, what other forms of connection can we help find? What does that connection look like? What do you want it to look like? What do you want it to feel like? What do you want to not it to look or feel like? All of those things are important. And then finally, communicating, right? Communicating however that person can to their friends, family, coworkers, anyone, will help them know how to best come alongside them, especially when grief arrives. And again, in the beginning, we don't know what we need. And it's such an awful thing. Let me know what you need. Many grievers don't know what they need. But let's help choose and connect the things that do feel right for you. And then we can choose how to communicate that to your people the way that you want. And if that changes, we'll come back and figure out another way to present that. But whatever the case is, the 3 C's are always my good place to meet people who are grieving to see where they're at. So if anything, I hope that that helps each of you have some ideas of where to start with individuals who come to your office presenting with spiritual or religious concerns, and what ways you can start practicing some of these things. So I know this was a lot of information. I know that I went through it pretty fast. I know the hour goes by very quickly, But I hope that each of you from this presentation have some new understanding or light or perspective about the work of spirituality and religion when it comes to the therapeutic process. If you're not comfortable with that, I completely understand, and you don't need to be comfortable with it. It's simply recognizing the importance that that may be for our clients and being able to refer them to someone who is comfortable if that is something that the client deems very important for them to find the equilibrium again in their lives. So I will leave you all with one of my the ending of one of my favorite poems that has to do with loss and grief by Maya Angelou, and it is called When Great Trees Fall. And when great souls die, after a period, peace blooms, slowly and always irregularly. Spaces fill with a kind of soothing electrical vibration. Our senses restored, never to be the same. Whisper to us. They existed. They existed. We can be and be better, for they existed. Thank you all so much again for taking the time out of your busy morning, afternoon, or evening to be here with me today. Again, I know I covered a lot, so if there is anything that I can do to help answer or continue these conversations, please reach out to me through email, and I'd love to continue having these conversations with all of you. So peace and light to all of you for the rest of your day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.